University as we know it is getting an upgrade. Swinburne University's deep industry partnerships give you real industry experience with innovation and creativity in every course, connecting you to your career faster. So, when does the next generation of university arrive? Now. Swinburne. Next Gen. Now.
And with Swinburne Vietnam and the Student HQ team, and we're going to be your host for today. I'm honoured to welcome you all to Swinburne Vietnam's third episode of the Changemakers Series. This is an innovative series of conversations where we'll have a number of highly acclaimed and respected members of the global community joining us to have discussions and talk about various aspects of their lives, their careers, and the roles of changemakers in the modern world. Now, don't forget, with this being a live stream Q&A, we want to hear all about what are the questions that our audience have. So all you have to do is post your questions during the live stream, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible at the end. Now, it's an honour to welcome today's guest, Mr. Anthony McClaran. Anthony is the Vice-Chancellor of St Mary's University in London and took up the post in April 2020 after returning to the UK from Australia, where he served as CEO of the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, TEQSA, from 2015 to 2020. Prior to that move, Anthony was Chief Executive of the UK's Quality Assurance Agency and Chief Executive of the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service. Anthony has also held a number of governance roles at all levels of education and was Chair of Council and Pro-Chancellor of the University of Gloucestershire from 2007 to 2009. He's currently the chair of Guild HE, a recognised representative body for over 50 UK higher education universities and colleges, and a member of the International Advisory Board for the US Council for Higher Education Accreditation. He sits on Richmond Borough's Employment and Skills Task Force, and in July 2021, Anthony was appointed by Pope Francis to the Governing Council of AVAPRO, the Holy See's Quality Assurance Agency for Pontifical Higher Education. We're honoured to have you here with us today, Anthony, and I'm certain our audience is looking forward to hearing your insightful thoughts. Would you like to say a few words before we continue?
Really good to be here.
Thanks very much. And next, we have Dr. Marisha McCauliffe. She is the Director of Student HQ for Swinburne Vietnam. Marisha, would you like to say a couple of words?
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us today. We're truly honoured to have such a wonderful guest. Thank you.
And finally, joining us, we have the Director of Swinburne Vietnam, Dr. Hoang Viet Ha. Dr. Ha, would you like to say a few words?
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Very happy to see you today, right? And so ourselves and our students have a chance to listen from you. And adaptive and resilient is, I think, it's one of the key skill in this time, right? Because everything is changing, and it's not easy to adapt with a new knowledge and skill, right? So thank you very much for the share today. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ha. And thank you for everyone's introductions. Now, without further ado, let's move on to the main section of today, and we'll allow our audience to hear from our special guest. So our first question for Anthony today will come from Dr. Marisha.
Anthony, we were having a chat the other day and in preparation for this, and it's really quite interesting and fascinating to hear the stories that you've been through, particularly since we last heard from you in the public face in Australia to now. So what do you think the challenges have done for us, and how do you think they've completely changed our way of thinking and working? And so what has been the biggest way you've had to adapt and most important lesson in how your perspective has changed while getting through this pandemic?
Thank you. It was, I was very much living through the impact of those changes in my move from Australia to the UK. I arrived back in the UK the day before Prime Minister Boris Johnson declared the first UK lockdown. So we arrived on Sunday the 22nd, and on 23rd, the Prime Minister addressed the nation. And, you know, that always has an ominous sound, doesn't it, when you hear that the Prime Minister is going to be addressing the nation. And, of course, he was addressing the nation to say that there was going to be the need for a lockdown. And that first lockdown was pretty hard, actually, not as hard as in other places. And I know colleagues in Australia have been through some very hard and prolonged lockdowns. But nevertheless, it meant that you could only exercise for an hour a day. All teaching at universities had to be conducted from home, and you couldn't be in the office in any kind of normal way. So I took up my post about a month later, and I was immediately faced with the fact that, you know, the very first thing two things actually. The very first thing I did was to go onto campus and to go and thank the catering and housekeeping staff who had done a brilliant job keeping everything running for our international students, who of course were stranded. They couldn't travel back to their own countries, and they were stranded on campus. So we kept them housed and warm and fed, and etc. And of course, it was our frontline staff who were doing that. The second thing I did was to collect a laptop to take back to my rented flat and to begin my work of being Vice-Chancellor of the university. So, you know, that obviously on a very personal level was a significant challenge, because I had to introduce myself to as many people in the university as possible, and particularly to my senior team and my board of directors. And it was all done through Zoom. In fact, I've only just had about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had my first face-to-face meeting with my senior leadership team. That's, you know, nearly 20 months into the job. So there were all sorts of challenges on that very personal level, but then of course they become more than just personal, because they're about the way in which you're trying to run an organization in partnership with your team and with the staff, and also trying to keep the staff and the students motivated during what was a very discomforting time. We probably, sad to say, in a funny kind of way, we've got used to it now because the whole pandemic has gone on for so long, but we weren't used to it back in early 2020. It was really quite shocking. And I remember going into the university to film an address to the staff and students. And I felt it was really important that it was filmed in the university, just as a sign that the university was still open. There might not be many people there, but it was still open. We were keeping going, and people should have hope that we should be able to return to the university in due course, as we were. Final thing I'll just say at the moment is there's also the planning dimension, the strategic planning dimension. We immediately had to have a very, very short-term plan just to get us through what we thought might be, you know, a crisis of 2 or 3 months. Of course, it's turned out to be far longer. But we had to have a plan. We had to have a financial plan. We had to have a plan for teaching. We transferred our teaching online. We had, I think, in terms of teaching online and technology enhanced learning, we probably did about 3 years progress in 3 months, you know, because the pressure meant that it had to be done so quickly. So we were doing that kind of short-term planning to get through the crisis, while at the same time also trying to make sure we didn't lose sight of the medium and long term, because you have to believe that we were going to come out of this, and that we would need to be able to reconnect with the strategic direction of the university. So at the end of week one, on my final Friday of week one, I actually set up a joint committee or joint working group between the senior leadership team and the board, because I thought that at a time like this, the board and the executive have got to be absolutely together. You know, when you're in a potential crisis or an actual crisis situation, it's so important to keep those two things together. So we had a joint working group, and we looked systematically over the next few weeks. We looked at all the key issues. You know, what was going to happen to student recruitment, what was going to happen to research, what was going to happen to technology enhanced learning, all of those things in order to create a new strategic plan, which would take into account the crisis we were going through, but would also plan for the future after it.
Yeah, and what that is, you know, to actually have somebody articulate that both a short-term emergency plan alongside the planning for a long-term success. I mean, that in and of itself is quite extraordinary in terms of senior leadership and being able to balance and understand, okay, you know, which hat am I thinking, and, you know, how do I adapt and change, and how do I actually see through that? So that is something which is, I find incredibly fascinating in a senior leadership role. So, but Jos had a question there that sort of comes out of that. Jos, what's...
Yes, yeah, I mean, it's in relation to kind of what, you know, this tragically difficult last year and a half and 2 years. But this question is more about resilience. So, you know, resilience is an essential skill for any change maker. So what have you learned during the pandemic about resilience in yourself, and then especially when it comes to your own sort of mental health?
That is a very good question. I think resilience has really come to the forefront. I think it's true of our university, and it's probably true of maybe every university, that mental health has shot to the top of the agenda, both for staff and students. And it's played out in different ways as this has gone on over months, over a year. You know, the initial challenge was supporting. I mentioned those students who were still on campus, who were stranded on campus. Remember, the government had ordered all other students to go home. It wasn't like they had a choice. So the students who were still on campus had no choice. They had to be there, and they might be very concerned about relatives back in their home country. They might be very concerned about when they'd be able to see their families again. So there were a lot of very immediate mental health issues to do with supporting those students. And then we have the staff pressures. And of course, again, like many universities, it would be not unreasonable. I hope I'm not upsetting any of my colleagues to say, you know, that the age profile of academic staff meant that a significant number of them felt quite vulnerable, you know, to the dangers of contracting the virus. And there was a lot of anxiety when things started to open up again, and we were asking staff to come back onto campus. You then had a new set of challenges. You had to be in a situation where you could completely reassure them that, as far as possible, you can't guarantee safety against a virus like this, but you could do what, you know, the most that you could do to try and mitigate the danger. So that was a problem. But then I would say, in a way, the most interesting and the most difficult resilience problem was not the direct fear of staff or students about contracting COVID. I think it was the week after week, month after month, meetings on Zoom. People would be doing 6, 7, 8, 10, a dozen meetings on Zoom a day. They might not be looking after their physical health in the sense of getting enough exercise and fresh air. So there were issues around that. Now, we did put in place a lot of support to help staff feel that they weren't alone, that they could reach out for help, that there was no shame in doing that. And then in more concrete ways, we also responded as we moved into a more mixed situation where some students were back on campus, some teaching was taking place face-to-face. We moved to a situation where we formalized the concept of flexible working so that staff could apply to make more of a balance between being in at the university and working from their home situation. And I think that helped. We also put some significant more additional funding into helplines for both staff and students in terms of coping and being able to talk to people about the pressures they were under.
So that's quite a fascinating thing when you're thinking about not only are you coming in new to a university, but you are also having to implement a whole new system that actually considers the mental health of people and of the organization. Before I go on to my next question that sort of looks a little bit before the pandemic started, I'm curious about managing your own mental health. I mean, I was a senior leader in India during the initial part of the pandemic, and I found it extremely challenging because if you're supporting everyone else, what do you do to support yourself, Anthony?
Yeah, no, that again is a very good question. I think, I'm going to say that in a funny kind of way, the necessary disciplines of lockdown actually helped with that. Because the big thing during the first lockdown here, I don't know if it's the same in your own experiences, but the first lockdown here was as I mentioned, the government would permit you to take, I think it was an hour's exercise a day. You were only meant to leave your house for an hour a day to exercise. So of course, and everything else was closed. So there wasn't a lot to do really. So everyone, one of the positives was that people really began discovering again the green spaces around them. It became so important to go to the park and to have your walk, to just reconnect with some fresh air, with water, with grass, with with trees, and that became an important. So people integrated that into their daily routine, and we found, certainly my wife and I found that this became really important to us, and I think many people were in that situation, and it's something that we very much kept up, even though conditions are now much more relaxed. And I think that was incredibly important. I think it was sometimes important to switch off completely by watching terrible television, just being transported to another world altogether, So that, I guess, that played its part too. But I think that reconnection with the need to take time for yourself, to walk, to exercise, to connect with nature, I think that's been one of the powerful lessons of the pandemic, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I recall I was locked down for 2.5 months. We weren't allowed outside at all. And I remember one of the curious things about the pandemic was, because I was in India and looking out one day and just realizing, oh, wow, the sky's blue, because that you don't often see that in, with the smog and with the pollution. And it was a sort of almost like a light bulb moment. Wow, I'm so lucky to come from Australia and where the skies are always blue. So now that's going to lead me on to my next question. Like, Anthony, you are a change maker. You're a change maker in higher education, and those of us from Australia are definitely aware of that. As CEO of TEQSA, you had made some monumental changes, and it's thanks to you and your team at TEQSA that have really pushed us along higher education to become, the quality that it is today. Now, given that what you know now and in the pandemic, and you're reflecting on that time then, would you have done anything differently? I mean, hindsight is always a thing, but would you have done anything differently, do you think?
That's, again, another really good question. I've reflected on that quite a lot, as you would imagine. Plenty of opportunities on the long flight from Perth to Heathrow. First of all, a couple of things. So first of all, Marisha, thank you very much for those kind words. Can I return the compliment by saying that, of course, the quality in Australian higher education is in the universities and institutions of higher education. I mean, Australia has a fantastic higher education system. And it was, for me, a privilege to be involved with it for 5 years and to play a part in that system. And I genuinely want to express that because it's an extraordinarily strong higher education system. lots of innovation, lots of really exciting developments, I think. What I tried to do when I came to TEQSA, what it seemed to me was necessary, and what there was some appetite for, was for a regulator which, while not stopping to be a regulator, nevertheless took an approach which was much more one of partnership with the entities that were being regulated, learning from them, listening to them. And we tried to do that in a number of ways. One of the small but actually significant ways is, you know, we actually had the TEQSA conference. Now, TEQSA had never had a conference before. And I remember when I suggested it, there was some skepticism. You know, like, who will come, sort of thing. You know, who's going to... Actually, it was turned out to be incredibly popular. And it showed...
The question was, Anthony, who didn't come?
Well, you know, it was wonderful because there was such an appetite among colleagues in the Australian system to talk about these issues. And it was not that regulation is just something that was done to them. It was something where they wanted to be active participants in raising quality. And from the point of view of a regulator and someone who's worked in quality assurance, that's what you want, particularly with a sector as mature and as influential, as important as higher education. You know, you don't want to be regulating higher education in a way that simply is a control and command kind of model, because that's not an appropriate way of dealing. Because actually, many of the best ideas that you're going to get as a regulator will come from the people that you're regulating. It wasn't, you know, 40 or 50 of us sitting around in Melbourne in TEQSA coming up with all the good ideas. It was about listening to. I think also I would say that we took, and credit to the commissioners as well, we took much more seriously the need to explain what we were doing. You know, sometimes regulators could be a little bit never explain, you know, just I'm the regulator, do what I say, and that's it. And we felt that that was inadequate. Now, you asked if I would have done anything differently. You know, did we succeed entirely? I think we succeeded to an extent. I think by the time I left, there was still significant gaps in particularly our relationship with the private higher education sector, which I think tended to see TEQSA as inherently maybe biased against the private sector. I could say hand on heart, I don't believe we were. We were a risk-based regulator, and we were going to where we saw the risk. And certainly in the time I was there, quite a lot of that risk was in, you know, relatively small private provision in, you know, basically in Sydney and Melbourne, I would say. But that didn't mean that we had some inherent, you know, animus against private higher education provision. Far from it. One of the things I'm really pleased about was that the review, which was in train when I was still there, was completed just after I left into the provider categories. I think it's clear now, and I was very in favor of this development, that the reconfiguration of the provider categories would create a more fluid sector where it would be possible for the worthy, really high quality providers who were perhaps at an earlier stage of their journey to progress and to achieve university college recognition, and then ultimately to achieve university recognition. And to the extent that I'm able to keep in touch with the Australian scene now, that seems to be happening, I think. And I think that's a really positive development.
It is. And thank you. And just as a point of interest before I hand back over to Jos, it was interesting because Jos and myself and a few others were sitting there the other day. We've got a student intern, and we were sitting there the other day, and we were thinking about, okay, the role of Anthony's role in your role in higher education in Australia, and we thought we would ask the current student, why would you choose Swinburne, Vietnam? Why would you choose an Australian education, you know, to do your undergraduate in? And one of the very first things she said, Jos, was, you remember, it was about they know that it is quality. And that was the one thing that came out, Jos. So, that was one of the things. We didn't even hedge her towards that. It was one of the very first points, wasn't it, Jos?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, listening to students and, you know, taking that on board is a particularly important thing. You know, even in the regulation of how universities work, is that, you know, the students are the ones who are going to be walking away from this process, and, you know, to kind of reflect on their points of view, I think are very, very important.
A couple of things. First of all, completely endorse what Jos has said about the centrality of the student voice, and that leads me into saying that I do think, on reflection, we could have pushed harder on that in the TEQSA regulatory situation. I think that when I think about the work I did at QAA, for instance, students were very, very central to the work that we did. We had students on our board of directors. We had student representatives in every university and higher education institution. And that was really, really important in terms of making sure that we were always acting with the student voice very clearly in our ears, so to speak. I don't think we were quite as clear-cut about that at TEQSA. We did, though, establish a student advisory board, which was very helpful, which reported directly to the commissioners, and I think was very much a step in the right direction. But I guess if I left with any sense that there were still things where further progress was desirable, that would be one of them, I think, in terms of, you know, reinforcing that centrality of the student role. The other thing I just wanted to say was the point that you both just made about the importance of the Australian quality assurance regime to the standing of Australian higher education internationally. One of the things I think Australia very much got right in regulatory terms, and this is written right into the purposes of TEQSA, it's very clear that one of the objects of TEQSA is the reputation of Australian higher education internationally. So that was a very clear purpose. We were absolutely clear about it. And I have to say that we always found that when we were working internationally, there was superb integration with other parts of the federal government who also had responsibilities in relation to international matters, whether that be trade or embassies, diplomacy, you know, etc. I thought that all joined up extremely well, and it showed the seriousness. And in fact, my colleagues in the UK will feel slightly differently about this, but in my final year at TEQSA, of course, Australia reached a point where it overtook the UK as the world's second most popular destination for English-speaking higher education. So that whole point about reputation, both in terms of Australian higher education delivered overseas and international students being attracted to Australian higher education, I think was very important, and it was very hardwired into TEQSA's role.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
What an excellent answer for the question there. Thanks very much, Anthony. I have another question for you. It's a slightly different subject now, but it's more talking about skills and abilities. So along with the normal set of soft skills, what other knowledge and skills do you think is required of post-pandemic change makers?
Yeah, I think that the soft skills are clearly perhaps come even more to the fore. I think that, well, I'm going to answer this in terms of what we're doing at St Mary's, maybe just to give concrete examples. So I think the soft skills have come very much to the fore, both in terms of personal resilience, but also in terms of having the empathy to manage sensitively teams who will be on all different places on the anxiety scale, if I could put it that way. Now, that's always true of any group of human beings in a team. You know, you're going to have some who, you know, are naturally reasonably relaxed, laid back people, others who are high anxiety, others who have particular reasons for anxiety. But that's all been thrown into much sharper contrast by the pandemic and the responses to the pandemic. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is that I think that at a societal level, the pandemic has initiated a reevaluation of what is important. You may have seen way back last year on the news, but here in the UK, every Thursday evening at a designated time, I think it was 8 o'clock in the evening, everyone used to go outside their front doors and their balconies to applaud the health workers. Just to have it was quite extraordinary. You'd go out and you just hear this applause going on for about 5 minutes, people banging saucepans, and it was extraordinary, just to show support for the frontline health workers who were helping people through the pandemic, and of course dealing with some huge amount of trauma themselves, with very distressing hospitalizations, etc. So we all, as a society, we thought that these people who are often not terribly well paid, who are maybe sometimes quite marginalized people, suddenly we realize it's them. It was the people who collected the garbage. It was the people who kept deliveries going when all the shops were shut. Suddenly these people came into a new prominence. Rightly so. We started reevaluating what was important in our society. Whether that will lead to long-standing change, I don't know. It's probably too early to say. But in terms of what we do at the university, we are placing a new emphasis on incorporating for all students a dimension of service learning. The idea that part of your experience as a student will be to incorporate an element of service learning, service-led learning, where you may be taking part in some voluntary work, some work which takes you out of your own inward concerns through to connecting with others and helping others. So I think those kinds of skills are going to be much more prominent than perhaps they were before. I hope so. And then finally, of course, there is the fact that we've all been confronting the need for everybody to have a basic sense of scientific literacy. Science and the development of the vaccines, etc., has been so important as a way of combating the effects of the virus. And we know that some of the debates there in public have been very unedifying, because people have been very suspicious of the work that's been done to develop these kinds of vaccines. And I don't want to patronize everyone who's suspicious of them. They may feel that they have good reason to be, but at least to the extent that those debates are not well informed by an appreciation of the scientific realities. Clearly, universities have a role to play in reasserting the importance of evidence, of research, etc.
Yeah, and I think that's really quite interesting. And I sense that Dr. Ha wants to ask a question here, because he's quite keen on the critical thinking aspect. Is that what you're going to ask, Dr. Ha, or you have another question altogether?
Okay, thank you. I think your speak is very interesting in terms of resilience. And when there's a crisis happen, right? So people more have a tendency to do the change, right? Like the boat is sinking and people need to do something immediately, otherwise they're gonna die. So how to keep this open and changing mindset, right? In the people, right? When maybe in the post pandemic there's no crisis anymore, and people need to keep the changing mindset of how to keep it, how to become it like in the blood, in that state of mind. It's always like always like for the people.
I think that what my response to that would be that we have tried, when I mentioned the strategic planning process that we initiated back in April, May 2020, with the intention of completely revising the university strategic plan. One of the objectives of that process, which we stated explicitly, was for colleagues to reflect on the benefits of any of the steps that had been taken during the crisis that could be taken forward for the future even when the crisis had ended. Now, quite a lot of that centered on this desire to capitalize on the very rapid developments in online and technology enhanced learning. So that was a key element. But we also, as I mentioned earlier, we also actually changed the conditions for flexible employment, because we thought, you know, even when the crisis ends, we've actually all proved that we can do things remotely that we had never occurred to us that we would be able to do. And we want to preserve that, we want to keep that, and we want to make sure that staff can take advantage of that flexibility. We've also reflected, I think, on the sustainability dimensions of this. And of course, the COVID crisis is not the only crisis we face. There is the climate crisis. And, you know, I have to say, and I'm sure many others would be in the same position, when I think back to the readiness with which I would jump on a plane at Melbourne Airport to travel to Canberra for a meeting, which I would now conduct via Zoom, I feel slightly embarrassed, you know, and I feel, was that really a good use of resource? Because, I mean, I think one would have to say probably not, almost certainly not, you know. Now, there are some meetings, I think we all know there are some meetings where face-to-face interaction is very, very important. And certainly our students have left us in no doubt that it's important for them in teaching, and we agree with them. But I think equally at the business level, we have to reflect on the sustainability. And again, I think, Dr. Ha, that'll be one of the things that we carry forward, even when the crisis is ended. I think we will have a new approach to the sustainability of our activities.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And that was such a really interesting question, Dr. Ha. It is about how do you keep that momentum? How do you keep it going? You know, all of these new things that we've rediscovered, you know, during the pandemic, how do you keep that going? Now, we're nearly towards the question time. I've got one question and then Jos has got another. But Anthony, the letter.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well,
can you tell us, and for the audience that are in Australia and the rest of the world, Anthony will tell us about a letter that he received from a very special person. Can you tell us a little bit about this letter? This is news to the rest of the world.
Jos was kind enough to give my sort of mini potted CV at the beginning, and yeah, I was honoured and delighted to receive a letter with the name of Pope Francis at the top, which is obviously not a common occurrence, indicating that His Holiness had approved my appointment to the governing council of a body called AVEPRO. So AVEPRO is the Vatican's agency for quality assurance. I might just say something a little bit about that, because it also relates to the institution where I'm currently based. So around the world, and you may well be familiar with this already, but around the world, there are what are called pontifical universities, pontifical institutes.
Yes.
They are authorized by the Vatican to teach theology, philosophy, canon law, etc. In other words, the major ecclesiastical disciplines, and to award degrees which are in effect authorized by the Holy See. Those universities and those qualifications have their own quality assurance agency, and that is AVEPRO, which stands for, I can't remember what it all stands for now, but you'll see it if you look on the website. But it's essentially, it's about the quality assurance of those qualifications. It relates directly to St. Mary's as well, because at St. Mary's we have one of these pontifical institutes called the Mater Ecclesiae College, and we offer degrees which are authorized by the Vatican and quality assured by AVEPRO. So yeah, it was a huge honor to be invited to join the governing council. I've got my first meeting in Rome in December. Very much looking forward. It's actually a reconnection for me with AVEPRO, because AVEPRO are members of sorry for all the acronyms. They're members of another organization called ENQA, which is the European Association of Quality Assurance. And I used to be on the board of that body. And it's lovely to be able to reconnect with some of the colleagues that I knew during that period.
Wow. So yes, that letter will be something quite special.
The letter will be framed.
Yes, you
it's
have
going
one
on the
question.
wall.
Yeah, I want to see a picture.
Yeah, I just have a final question for you. This is a question that we ask all of our guests in the Changemakers series, and that question is to focus more towards our students, I suppose. But how do we inspire our students to become change makers?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I'd almost want to flip that round. And I have to say that during this pandemic, our students have constantly inspired me to be a change maker. I mean, it's just been, we've focused on some of the mental health issues and some of the challenges and some of the struggles. But the other side of the coin has been the extraordinarily sort of energy, vibrancy, positivity of our students. They were so keen to come back onto campus. We had a wonderful week in July where we had a week of glorious sunshine. We'd taken the gamble to have our graduation ceremonies on campus. And our campus it's very beautiful. It's very green. It's lovely. It's near the River Thames, etc. And it will be great to welcome any of you there when you're able to come to London. That would be very good. And we had a marquee, and we had marquees with food and drink. We had a marquee for the ceremonies themselves, and there were students and parents who were in tears. They were just it was so wonderful to be back in the community. And one of the things that's really encouraged me is I was talking to our student union president for sport, and sport is a very important element of St Mary's. Samo Farah was one of our ex-students, one of our alums. So it's a very big thing here. And I've been told that the sign-up rates for the sports societies are astronomical at the moment, way higher than they were before the pandemic, because the students are making up for lost time. They realize how important being able to be with each other and to take part in activities with each other is. So I find that they have constantly then inspired me and my colleagues on the senior team to want to do our best for them, to meet their aspirations, and to create a situation where safely we can offer the face-to-face, genuine learning experience that they were demanding. Now, I say that fully aware and fully supportive of the fact that there can be extraordinarily good online experiences too. And as I mentioned earlier, that's one of the lessons I think we've drawn from this pandemic. But I think when someone has signed up for a face-to-face experience, then obviously, that's what they're looking for. And so we've had to try to make sure that we can meet their aspirations and their energy. So my advice would be, if you're working in higher education, a bit like you said earlier on, Jos, listen to your students, really listen to them, and respond to the energy that they are bringing to the university community. I think that's my answer to that.
That was great. Thank you so much. So this is it's going to bring us to the end of the questions that we have for you. But we've had a number of questions come through from some of the viewers. So we're just going to we've got another just over 10 minutes. So we'll go through a couple of other questions for you. So one that we have here, I think this is a pretty good question for you. So, what inspired you to have a career in global higher education?
Yeah, that's
good.
Well, I don't know if on day one I sort of thought, right, I'm going global, But look, what inspired me to have a career in higher education is that I took a job in the University of Warwick, actually. Some of you may know the University of Warwick.
Yeah.
I took a job there, and in the central administration. And my background, I guess, as a Vice-Chancellor is unusual in the sense that my university career has been an administrative and managerial one rather than an academic one. I found it fascinating. It was a really interesting time when I joined for higher. I think when I was a student, I didn't realize that anyone ran universities. I just they were just there. And you just just turned up and expected to be taught and given a degree and all the rest of it. And you realize that they're actually fascinating institutions, really complex, with some quirks and foibles, which make them very, very interesting. But of course, with the most extraordinary people, both in terms of the academic staff and in terms of the students. And one of the sheer joys for me being back in a university setting after all the many years I spent working for higher education agencies has been, reconnecting with things like student drama and art exhibitions and all the life, cultural and intellectual, that goes on in a university. It makes it much more than just a place to work. So I found that I was working where I wanted to be. I really enjoyed it. I then, after working in a couple of universities, I'd always been interested in national policy. How do you make things happen across a whole system? And I went to work for the National Admissions Agency in the UK, which is called UCAS. And again, absolutely fascinating. From there, I went to quality assurance. From there to TEQSA, and you've kind of heard the rest, really. But it's the fascination, I think, has been about higher education as this extraordinarily transformative activity that goes on within our societies and is able to deliver at the individual level and the societal level such positive and strong changes for those who are engaged in it. The connection between that and national policy and let's face it, politics, who gets funding for what, and the global element was that I'd always vaguely had the idea that I would like to, in my mind, the idea I would like to work abroad at some point. When the opportunity came to go to TEQSA, I really jumped at that because I was I knew the agency. I was fascinated. Yeah. TEQSA was the first agency in the world doing quality assurance the way that it does it. So for all of us, this may sound a little bit nerdy, but for all of us interested in quality assurance, TEQSA were kind of trailblazing. So it was fascinating to get the opportunity to work there and to be in Melbourne and to be in Australia was a wonderful experience.
I can say that I'm a fellow nerd, Anthony. Absolutely passionate about quality in higher education. So
good.
We had another question there, and it is, what other issues besides from mental well-being arose when your university moved online, and then how did you resolve those issues?
Well, a lot of issues, and I don't think we've resolved them all yet. The first part was almost unalloyed success, really, in that the process of moving the delivery of our teaching online went far better than we dared to hope, really. So that was all very positive. But there were challenges even in those early stages. Some of those challenges were sort of contractual and legal. Academics quite rightly have an interest in the intellectual property of the of what they've produced for their lectures and their other teaching sessions. And so there were discussions around that issue. There were discussions around privacy, around the recording of meetings, etc. There were challenges around making sure that we knew we could deliver the content, but can you deliver the learning experience? And can you be sure that students are responding to the learning experience? So there were some challenges there. You wanted to make sure that you weren't just addressing a group of students on Zoom who basically, if not literally, switched off. So, you know, there were challenges around that. There were, and I think anyone who's been involved in this work, and of course I realize that talking to Swinburne, you know, you're a massive player here. But the resource needs are very significant, and you have to make decisions about how you're going to prioritize resource. So we are in the process at the moment of working through a strategy with the name of Go Digital, and we're looking at how much resource we can put into that. We're looking at how we can improve the experience we deliver, and we're looking at the possibility of working with partners in delivery, because I think this is much bigger than a single institution, really. And we think that there may be some creative ways. And again, I'm conscious talking to colleagues from Swinburne. I'm talking to, you know, a university that is so advanced in this area. We're a small university. You know, we're only 5,500 students. So it's a very different scale to the scale of a typical Australian university. I think of the, you know, the 70,000s and the 80,000s and some of the huge numbers in the Australian system. But yeah, the challenge is not yet over.
Dr. Ha had, I think, one last question to ask you.
Okay. Yes, one of the fortune teller, he said that the future of education is online, right? So now people expect to come back online. So he said that the future of education is online. So what do you think about that? Do you think that they think more about opportunities rather than something challenge with education?
I don't think the future of higher education is online, or rather, I don't think that's the entire future of higher education. I think there's a very important part of the future which is online. But I can honestly say that we were a little surprised by the forcefulness with which our students wish to return to the face-to-face campus experience. They were even saying they wanted face-to-face lectures. Now, before the pandemic, I don't think they, no disrespect to our students, but, you know, I'm not sure they attended all the lecture, you know, but I think it's been a case of people realize what they were missing. People realize what they were missing with the experience of being together with the community. But so I think there is and will remain a place for face-to-face higher education. I guess the easy cop-out here, which everyone is using, is to say the future is blended.
Hybrid.
You know, the future is blended. We're going to have some face-to-face. We're going to have some, and maybe there is some truth in that. Yeah, but I think face-to-face will continue.
Yeah. There is this thing now called hybrid, you know, so it's, So, Jos, you're going to start wrapping up?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think your answers have been amazing. There's some great questions for you as well today. It's been a really good session. We're going to wrap it up now. So thank you for everybody who asked questions, and for everyone for taking part. We'd just like to thank all of the participants, for everyone who has come today, for our amazing 3 guests as always. I wondered if you guys would just like to say a few things. Anthony, would you like to kind of start us off?
Sure, I would. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this today. I've really enjoyed the questions, and I've enjoyed meeting you and reconnecting, Marisha. It's lovely to reconnect with you and with Swinburne. So thank you. And I hope that that's been of interest to those who are engaging with this session online. But thanks again.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Ha, would you like to say a few things?
Yes, thank you very much, Anthony. And I hope that today you do the online, so that in the future you will come to Swinburne and talk with our students offline, so we have a blended talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ha. And finally, Marisha, would you like to wrap up today?
Yes. Thank you so much, Anthony. It has truly been a pleasure to reconnect with you again. And indeed, we are looking forward to being at St. Mary's, just as we're looking forward to having you here in Hanoi, eating bun cha and banh mi, everything here, and enjoying life in the streets and in the in our wonderful learning communities here. And thank you so much. We definitely would like to do this again. And once we're finished and once Jos is wrapped up, stay online and we'll have personal goodbyes together.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Marisha. So this is going to bring us to the end of today's Changemaker session. I again want to thank everybody who's taken part, all of our viewers, and especially Anthony. Your insights today have provided everyone who's watching with some really, really good pointers and some very, very interesting things, particularly in light of what has been going on with the pandemic. And I'm sure that if our students are listening to this, then they will be able to take some incredibly useful pointers away from it as well. So I just want to thank everyone for joining, interacting, providing the questions, and then finally I just want to remind everybody that the next episode in the Changemakers series will be on Monday the 20th of December with our guest, Her Royal Highness Princess Diya Kumari from the City Palace of Jaipur in India. She's a member of the Indian Parliament and a president of the Princess Diya Kumari Foundation. So we look forward to seeing you all there. And once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, Anthony. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We are global citizens. This is a whole other life Little Australia of Swinburne, Vietnam with Global Citizen and Career Development Program 2020. What does it mean to be a global citizen? A global citizen can study anywhere, live anywhere, and work anywhere. A global citizen cares about global issues, uses critical thinking and knowledge to look for solutions and apply them to the real life. A global citizen cannot lack a presentation and debate skills. Why we debate? For good ideas and true innovation, you need human interaction, conflicts, arguments, debates, researches, practice academic integrity. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. All debaters have learned a great lesson on teamwork and discipline to give out a true intellectual party. English, social skills, and critical thinking. These are three important foundations of any global citizens. We all want to make the world a better place for ourselves and future generations. This is the main reason we bring the perfect program, Global Citizen, into Swinburne, Vietnam. I am a global citizen. Become a global citizen, unlock your power, and delight your future. Let's get started with journey to become a global citizen at Swinburne, Vietnam.